Hey viewers, welcome to Intresthy classes. Let's start the video. In previous lecture, we have discussed about partially checked exception, fully checked exception, and behavior of various exception with the help of exception hierarchy chart. Now, in this tutorial, we are going to learn customized exception handling by using try and catch block. To understand this concept, let's take an example. I have defined a class named test, public static void main, string args. I defined 5 statements which I want to be printed on the console. So let's check, is there any chance of raising an exception in these statements? So let's start with the first statement, that is system.out.println line 1. So there is no chance of raising any exception in this statement. So this will execute it perfect. System.out.println line 2. So in this statement also there is no chance of raising an exception. It will be executed perfect. But in the third statement, that is system.out.println 10 division by 0. Any number division by 0 which is undefined. So in the case of Java, it is treated as an exception. So it raises an exception of type arithmetic exception. So let's understand what should be the output when we execute this code in the compiler with the help of compiler. That is, line 1 will be executed perfect, line 2 will be executed perfect, but in the third line, that is system.out.println 10 division by 0, which raises an exception of type arithmetic exception. So when we run this concept code, that this output will be showed, that is exception in thread main, java.lang.arithmetic exception division by 0 at test.main. So this statement will result in arithmetic exception. Now this two statement will not get executed. Why? Because if you are executing a block of code and in the meanwhile or in the middle of one of the statement any type of exception arises, then JVM will, and there is no, if you have not handled that exception, then JVM will simply terminate your program abnormally without executing your remaining codes. So here is the note, that is, the remaining statements never gets executed after the exception rises due to abnormal termination of the program. JVM will terminate your program abnormally when there is no handling code provided by the programmer in the program. So to understand this more clearly, let's run the code practically. So here is the code. So let's run this code. Save the file. Let's run the code in the command line. cd desktop, my location where I have saved the file. Then let's compile the code first. javac test.java. As it compile finds, as because it is a type unchecked exception, compiler doesn't check at its compile time. Let's run the code. Java test. See, line 1 is printed successfully, line 2 is printed successfully, but at the third line, that is, an exception has been raised of type arithmetic exception. And what is the description of exception? That is division by 0. At which position? What is the location of the exception? That is test.main at the 7th line. So this is the 7th line in which an exception has been raised. Now to handle this exception, let's move forward. So here we have the same code which we have discussed earlier. Now the concept is the code which may raise an exception, that code is called risky code. The code which may raise an exception, that code is called risky code. In this risky code, if any exception arises, then it should be written inside try block followed by catch block. Inside the risky code, if there is any chance of raising an exception, then it should be written inside try block followed by catch block. So let's understand from the top, that is system.out.println. This line will executed finds. There is no any chance of rising an exception. So this statement also compile finds, run finds. There is no chance of rising an exception. But in the third case, it will result in arithmetic exception, which we have discussed. Now we have written this code in the try block followed by catch block. If in the meanwhile, if this statement generates any type of exception, it should be handled by catch block and alternative statement will be executed. So as the control comes, which we have written inside try block, this statement will not get executed. Why? Because this statement will generate arithmetic exception. It is catched by the catch block, and this statement will be printed in the place of this statement, that is system.out.println 10 division by 0, an alternative code which we have provided in the catch block. Now this code will be run fine. Now let's move to this position, that is at the line 4, that is system.out.println line 4. So there is no chance of rising an exception, so this line will also executed perfect. At the line 5, that is system.out.println, this line 5, this is the statement which there is no chance of rising any type of exception. So this statement will also get executed fines. So what is the output we are going to get? Line 1 will be executed, line 2 will be executed, and this code rise an exception we have written inside try block, and alternative code will be executed, that is system.out.println 10 division by 0, which may result in 5. Then this statement will executed, that is line 4 will be executed and line 5 will be executed. So our code has been solved. We have handled the exception. So let's do practically in the command line. Run the code. That is, what I want to do is, I want to handle the exception. So this statement is responsible for rising an exception. I want to write this code inside try block followed by catch block. If this statement rises of type arithmetic exception, that is if this code rises any type of exception, so an alternative code will be printed. Perfect. So in this statement, if an exception arises, it should be catched by the catch block and alternative code will be executed. So let's run the code. Let's save the file. Let's run the code. Java C test.java. It compiled perfect. Let's run the code. Java test. See, line 1 is printed successfully, line 2 is printed successfully, and alternative code has been executed, that is 10 division by 2, that is 5, and line 4 is printed successfully and line 5 is printed successfully. So we have handled the exception. For any doubt and group discussion, join my Telegram channel. You can also check the link in the description box. You can follow me on Instagram and Facebook. Please subscribe to my channel Intresthy class and press the bell icon for the latest notification.